Welcome back, guys, to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about aperture, aka f-stop, and what f-stop you should probably be shooting at if you're in the studio or if you're on location or for whatever your style is. This video should give you some insight if you're not too sure on what aperture you should be using. So I have a couple sets of images here that I've taken this year, all different models, but they all were shot at different f-stops. So basically, if you are unaware, basically your f-stop or your aperture is just the blades in your lens that are creating a opening to your sensor, right? So, and that controls how much light actually hits the sensor, okay? But its secret ability is your depth of field, right? So if you want a shallow background, you probably are gonna shoot wide open. You're going to let a lot of light in, so that way the background is blurry and you only have one specific area in focus. Right now, that's very common in natural light photography and stuff like that. So, however, it's important to understand that you don't always have to do that, especially when you're shooting studio. There's not really much need for that in studio, right? Especially when your only need or reason for that is for a blurry background. When you're in the studio, you don't need that, right? So it's okay to just move your subject away from the background and to increase your f-stop, get more in focus, sharper image, higher resolution, higher quality, right? That's all good, and that's what we all want. And I'm gonna show you guys some examples. So if we look at this photo here, this photo I shot, I think about a week ago. This is a natural light photo. And I actually shot this wide open. I shot this at 1.8. It was actually really dark in that location, so I really had to open up my aperture. And if we look at this, the eyes are in focus, right? So the focus was on our right, her left eye. And you can see it's just tack sharp, right? It's awesome. And the rest of the skin is not a lot of detail. It looks pretty smooth. This is retouched, but I didn't really change the texture. I just dodged and burned. Pretty slightly. She already had, marvelous skin. So, and one thing we can notice, and if you have like a trained eye, you can really notice it, that this eye, our focus eye, is obviously much sharper than this one, right? And if we weren't wide open, they would both be almost hard to tell where the focus was, right? But if we really want to be sticklers, we can really zoom up. You can really see that this is 100% in focus. And this other one is definitely not, right? So this is a good example of 1.8. It's good for several reasons, right? It takes away your editing time. If you're not a big editor, right? If you don't like to edit, if you're still learning how to edit, so you don't want to take on those crazy editing projects, I totally get that. If you don't really have like a dodging and burning technique that you're comfortable with, or a frequency separation technique that you're comfortable with, shooting wide open might be better for you for now, so you can just learn how to shoot and stuff like that, and you don't really have to worry as much on the editing spot, because there's definitely less to do. The more detail, the more there is to edit, right? Now, moving on to the next, this is a photo that I shot maybe 3-4 months ago, I think, and this was shot at f11, right? So we were really high up. Now, I wanted a lot of detail in this. That was kind of the point of the shot, is that I wanted to get this black and white, a lot of contrast, cool stuff like that. But what I really wanted was a lot of detail in the face. And that's exactly what I got. I shot f11, and the eyes in focus, the forehead's in focus, the cheeks in focus, the neck is in focus, lips are in focus, everything is basically in focus. Of course, not in focus is some of the hair here kind of got blown out by the light. So, and that's fine, but this photo took me hours to edit, right? Just dodging and burning. I didn't use frequency separation at all. This is the original texture. All I did was just dodge and burn the whole thing. And it came out exactly how I wanted it to. Now, if I would have shot at 1.8 on this and controlled my exposure in other means, then it would probably be just the eye in focus, and I wouldn't got nearly as much detail, right? So you're kind of starting to see why it's important to understand your aperture and how to balance it, right? If you can balance your aperture, you can do basically anything you want. You can get anything in detail, or you can really select what you want. Now, just as for reference, I pulled up another photo that I shot even further back. This is like start of 2021, and I love this photo. It's a great portrait, but one thing that I noticed when I shot it was that, and I remember trying to correct it as we were shooting, this was the focus eye, and I bumped up the aperture really quick, and I was just barely able to get this eye in somewhat good enough focus. So I shot this at f5, I believe, or f5.6, and somewhere in that realm. And this eye is great, and this eye is just slightly out of focus. Now, when you guys are shooting portraits and you have a model that has her head turned like this, if you don't adjust the aperture for that head tilt, or that head turn, you will not get the other eye in focus, right? The depth of field is just too shallow at wide apertures. You just cannot get it. So you have to be able to adjust on the fly. Sometimes, it's like a lot of models will move on their own, especially if you're doing, fashion, or you're doing fine art and stuff like that, where models just like to do their own thing. And that's great. That is a great skill to have as a model. You as a photographer need to be ready to handle that, right? Because, a lot of models may not want to deal with you still kind of figuring out your aperture and stuff like that. So you might have to be like, okay, she's moving her head, bam, let me raise my f-stop, let me make sure I get both those eyes in focus. It's really important. And those are the 3 examples that I pulled up out of my files. I think that it's really important to understand this stuff. Basically, just to wrap it up, a quick overview. 1.8 is great if you don't want to do a lot of editing, and if you want to blur out backgrounds. This was shot inside. I wasn't really too worried about the background. She is pretty well separated from it, but that wasn't the whole reason why. Honestly, I just did it at the time because I was controlling the exposure. If you want a lot of detail, definitely bump up that f-stop. You will get the detail you want. Just make sure you nail that focus on where you want it, and your camera will do all the heavy lifting for you after that. And also remember that if your model is changing her head position, she's turning her head, bump up that f-stop just a little bit, just enough to get that other eye in focus. You don't have to change around your entire exposure. All you have to do is make sure you get that other eye in focus. With all that said and done, I really hope you guys found this helpful, and I really hope that this was able to increase your knowledge of aperture and f-stop. If it is, please leave a like and subscribe. It would really help me out. Leave a comment down below if you want me to do something on shutter speed or ISO. Thank you guys. See you in the next one.